For my project, I'm going to be talking about 9 women out of the thousands of them who have shaped the astronomy field for the better, but are being forgotten in the favor of men. This timeline is depicting just a small selection of influential, intelligent, and important women who shouldn't be forgotten, but celebrated, because without them, astronomy might very well be very different today. The first woman I'm going to be talking about is Caroline Herschel. You might be more familiar with her brother, William Herschel, but I argue that she impacted astronomy just as much as her brother. William became a telescope maker and was given a pension from King George III, and when Caroline was 32, she became her brother's apprentice and helped clean the mirrors used for his telescopes. Over time, she was beginning to be recognized for her influence on this scientific job, so much so that King George III gave her a pension as well, and this was the first time a woman was recognized for her scientific position. She is also credited with being the first woman to discover a comet, but she didn't stop there, and throughout her life she discovered 7 more comets, and she also became an honorary member of the Royal Astronomical Society and the Royal Irish Academy. Now moving on to Wilhelmina Fleming. She is credited with creating a classification system for stars. At the Harvard College Observatory, she worked with a group of women on the spectrum of wavelengths to be able to better classify stars based on their specific wavelength. Back then, the iconic rainbow image depicting the spectrum did not exist, but the dark absorption lines within it did. So, Fleming was able to classify stars from A to P, and this classification system is still used today. Throughout her entire career, it is said that she cataloged 10,000 stars. Going along with the topic of stars, another woman named Cecilia Payne-Gaposchkin claimed that the stars were primarily made up of helium and hydrogen in her 1925 thesis. Also, she became the first female professor at Harvard and opened the door for many more women to do the same. Quote, her work at the Radcliffe was the first doctoral dissertation in astronomy from Harvard, and it marked a turning point in the establishment of astronomy as a field that is independent from mathematics. End quote. She worked with a man named Pickering, and she was also part of the human computers at Harvard. And at this point, she was paid 25 cents an hour to do the work that revolutionized mathematics in astronomy. Moving on 20 years to 1945, Charlotte Morris Siddeley is another astronomer who has been forgotten from history. She is credited with discovering that technetium can be created naturally and that it's found in sunlight. Also, her tables of atomic spectra and energy levels were published and are still used today for references in spectroscopy. So without her, scientists might not have as much knowledge on energy levels of different elements. The next woman I will be talking about is named E. Margaret Burbidge, and she was prevalent in the 1950s. She worked with the Royal Greenwich Observatory. While she was there, she provided notable theories regarding measurements of the rotation and mass of galaxies, and also how chemical elements are found in the depth of stars through nuclear fusion. She was a pioneer for women in the astronomy field and was very vocal of her opinions, because in 1972 she refused the Annie J. Cannon Prize for the American Astronomical Society because, as it was an award for women only, it represented for her another facet of the same discrimination. Vera Rubin, the next woman in history to be remembered, used the spectrometer to spread out the spectrum of light coming from the stars in different parts of spiral galaxies. The stars in the disk of a galaxy move in roughly circular orbits around the center. If the disk is inclined to our line of sight, the stars on one side approach us while those on the other side move away. This is called the Doppler effect, and the wavelength shift is proportional to the speed of light source relative to the observer. Rubin made careful measurements of the Doppler shifts across disks of several galaxies. They could then calculate orbital speeds of the stars in different parts of those galaxies. So without her, measurements of galaxies could be very different today. All the other women I have discussed so far have been white women, but now is the time to talk about an African American woman who has greatly impacted NASA during her time working there. She worked for other places that were segregated, but at NASA, segregation was not allowed. So, during her time working there, Johnson was a member of the Space Task Group. In 1960, she co-authored a paper with one of the group's engineers about calculations for placing a spacecraft into orbit. It was the first time a woman in her division received credit as an author on a research report. Johnson also would calculate her paths of different spacecrafts and was so highly accredited that John Glenn requested that she verify that his spacecraft was working correctly. Her work was so incredible that there was a movie made about her and other women within this program called Hidden Figures.
The capsule moves from an elliptical orbit to a parabolic orbit. There's no mathematical formula for that. As we can calculate launch and landing, but without this conversion, the capsule stays in orbit. We can't bring it back home.
Maybe we've been thinking about this all wrong.
How's that?
Maybe it's not new math at all.
It could be old math. Something that looks at the problem numerically and not theoretically. Math is always dependable.
Going along with a woman who also worked in spacecrafts for space exploration at a point in history where it was a very popular thing to do, Valentina Tereshkova. She was the first woman to go to space, and she was chosen for the Vostok 6 flight, and she was able to do 45 revolutions around the Earth in 70 hours and 50 minutes. Then, because of her training as a parachuter, she descended down to Earth. Moving on to the late 60s, Jocelyn Bell Burnell discovered the existence of pulsars. A pulsar is a neutron star that emits radiation beams that sweep through Earth's line of sight. This discovery is considered to be the most important discovery in astronomy of the 20th century. To discover this type of star, she and her partner built a gigantic radio telescope. Her two male co-workers received a Nobel Prize for this work, but she did not receive one as well. So, Nobel Prize or not, Bell Burnell's depth of knowledge regarding radio astronomy and the electromagnetic spectrum has earned her a lifetime of respect in the scientific community and an esteemed career in academics. After receiving her doctorate from Cambridge, she taught and studied gamma-ray astronomy at the University of Southampton. Now that these women have been showcased, they should be remembered for their many achievements in the astronomy field. They all paved the way for women of today who want to pursue careers in astronomy. Without these many discoveries, the knowledge that astronomers have about our universe might seriously be lacking. Men have certainly provided amazing research, but the fact that women have been left behind in history is a shame, and these impacts should never be forgotten.